think Simone asked me to sort of, close this session of testimonies on the Ukraine situation of Ukraine cultural heritage. We saw mostly Odessa today because the colleagues in Kiev are not here. So of course I cannot replace their testimony, but I would like to talk to you very briefly of something that I always appreciated in Ukraine, and during the several visits I had the chance and the opportunity to do in the past in my position as director of the World Heritage Center of UNESCO, and discovering a country that is extremely rich in its human richness, but also historical heritage and natural heritage, perhaps not so well known in the West, but the moment you start looking at it, you understand not only the richness, but also the complexity and the intricacy of the history of Ukraine, which is clearly represented in its monuments and in its historical heritage. Today, when we hear about a missile coming here, a bombing here, it's so shocking because we know that this implies human suffering and death and misery. At the same time, whenever that happens, I look at the map, try to understand what has happened to this very precious heritage. Just days ago, for instance, there were some bombings in the central Kiev. Central Kiev is one of the most important heritage places in Europe. It is something difficult to explain for you, but let me tell you my impression, because when I visited the Cathedral of St. Sophia, which is a monument built by Saint Vladimir, the founder of the Orthodox Church, and perhaps, as the historians know, completed by his son Yaroslav. So we're talking about the end of the 10th century, around the millennium, around the year 1000. This place is very rich in Byzantine mosaics. Of course, because there was a huge, very close connection between Byzantium and Kiev. If you look at the map, the river Dnieper, is a navigable river, and from Kiev to Constantinople, you can go by boat. So obviously there was an immense expansion of the Christian culture in Central Europe thanks to this geographical situation. So the Church of St. Sophia is in fact a direct connection with Constantinople. And I come from a city that has the same situation. I'm from Venice. And Venice and Kiev have the same art. When I went to enter the St. Sophia Cathedral, I found myself in St. Mark's in Venice. Exactly the same techniques, the same artists, the same representations. So this is something extremely valuable and important, and it's a heritage that has suffered a lot. But St. Sophia itself was not destroyed during the Nazi occupation, but the other very important heritage, which is the convent, the Lavra Pechersk monastery, perhaps the most important holy place in the Orthodoxy, was heavily destroyed during the Nazis. So sometimes when we look at them, we have to understand that this has already been hit by major disaster, major catastrophes. And when you hear of missiles coming into central Kiev, you sort of balk, because it's a heritage exposed to an extreme danger, and a heritage that has already suffered in its past. The Ukraine is very rich. I cannot, of course, here talk about all of the historical heritage, but I'd like to point to some areas that are particularly exposed to risks. For instance, the northern city of Chernihiv, which is near to the border with Russia and Belarus, was sieged by the Russian army at the beginning of the war. And some damages were done to some of the very, very important churches. Chernihiv was an extremely important city during the original, the first state, the Rus of the first state of that region, Eastern Europe. So it has monuments of the 10th, 11th, 12th century that are so important, and it's also, by the way, a candidate for inscription in the heritage list of UNESCO. Fortunately, the siege didn't last very long. As you know, the Russian army was expelled from Ukraine, so the city was saved, but some damages were done. I remember when the city was under siege, we were in contact with people over there to try to understand what we could do. It was a very difficult situation. But the regions that are more exposed to destructions are the one on the eastern part of Ukraine. Yeah, that's where the war is raging. I'd like to point, for instance, to the city of Kharkiv, which was the capital of Ukraine. In fact, it's a very important city, the second city of the country, completely destroyed during World War II, completely destroyed. There are a few monuments that survived, but essentially the city was leveled by the war at that time. So it is a modern city, a relatively modern city. It has some of the most important modernist buildings in Europe. Again, there is one building that's which is even in the tentative list of UNESCO. It's like one of a fantastic modernist expression of the time, and something that is also at risk because Chernihiv has been bombed many times. In that same region, we have this very important city of Sviatohirsk that has the important Lavra Uspensky monastery, which was in fact damaged. Now, if you remember, there was a fire that destroyed part of it. I could make a long list. UNESCO is running a list of destroyed buildings. I think we are over 200 to destroyed heritage, but this will take us very long. I just want to point the fact that the eastern part of Ukraine is exposed to a very serious risk at the moment. Although, as we have seen even yesterday, cities that are very far from the theater of war are under risk. For instance, Lviv, Leopolis, which is on the other side of the country. It's next to the Poland side, and it's very far. It's hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, but still, it's threatened. And I think we've seen also Odessa has also been hit. These cities, Odessa, Leopoli was perhaps more like a Central European kind of city. It reflects more the relationship with Poland and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was in fact there until 1918. But so the architecture is very different from the rest from the eastern part. But still, it's very rich, and it reflects in all its churches, full of churches of all denominations. It reflects the very complex history of Ukraine in a set of monuments that are of great value and importance. And by the way, Leopolis is also, Lviv is also on the World Heritage List. There is a region that I like to point to. I had the chance of visiting that extensively. It is Crimea. Crimea has been occupied by Russia since 2014. Crimea is an extremely beautiful place, by the way, and very rich. It was a Greek colony. The area was called the Tauris at the time of the Greeks. And you certainly remember the tragedy Iphigenia and Taurids. So it was a very important Greek colony. And there is a World Heritage Site there called Chersones, Taurik. UNESCO could not visit anymore because it was occupied, and I think since many years, 6-7 years, nobody's gone there and has been able to visit and understand what's happening over there. But the Crimea is also rich in medieval heritage that links that part of the world with Italy in a way, because it was there were many Genoese colonies over there. It's very strange, to have Genoa having colonies there, but you have many, at least 6 or 7 cities that are in fact Genoese colonies, and then of course they were transformed into other. But even Sebastopol was a Genoese colony. Even the city of Feodosia, which is on the eastern part, was a Genoese colony. And visiting them is very interesting because some of them are almost intact, and you can see how this medieval heritage has been preserved. So there is, and I end up here, an enormous richness of heritage. which of course reflects the complexity, extreme complexity of the history of this region, and that is exposed to risks today. Now, of course, the priority of our concern goes to the life of people. We have today in Ukraine something like 15 million people that are displaced. And this is a huge load, a huge concern for not only for the government of Ukraine, but also for the international community, how these people can really survive and go through this very difficult winter that is in front of us. So main preoccupation is for the safeguarding of the lives of the Ukrainian population. But at the same time, let's not forget that this cultural heritage is part of a very strong identity that has to be preserved. So that's why I spent so much time in sort of pointing to the vastity and richness of the heritage. Culture is part of the life of people, and without culture, the communities cannot resist and cannot survive and reorganize and refound their future. So thank you very much. It was very short. I apologize for this, but I wanted to point to the great richness of Ukrainian cultural heritage and the great richness of the culture of Ukrainian people. Thank you.